I want to thank you for tuning in. I am continuing to give you some devotional thoughts from the Sermon on the Mount. Important to remember as we go through these things is that I believe that Jesus was trying to show these very religious people the full implications of the law. Because they had kind of managed things so that it was achievable and, in a sense, to establish a righteousness apart from Him. And so He's confronting their ideas about lust and divorce and oaths and retaliation and showing them that, they're all guilty. In verse 43, he says, "You have heard that it was said, 'You shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy.' But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be sons of your Father who is in heaven. For he makes his sun rise on the evil and on the good, and he sends rain on the just and on the unjust. For if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? And if you greet only your brothers, what more are you doing than others? Do not even the Gentiles do the same? You therefore must be perfect, as your heavenly Father is perfect." Well, if you start from the back, you would end up in perfect despair because no one is perfect. But that really isn't his point, is it? His point is to show you your absolute need. He's trying to draw each person to the understanding that there is a different paradigm. It's not about self-righteousness, because none of us can reach a perfect righteousness, or otherwise there never would have been sacrifices. But he says, listen, there's a different way of living as you live from Him who is the source, a different kind of attitude. He says, your religious teaching says, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. In Luke, he gives the parable of, who's my neighbor, right? I mean, the Good Samaritan, who's my neighbor? And the Jews had defined for themselves that neighbor was narrowly defined by those people who agreed with them. But Jesus says, no, don't just love your neighbor, but love those who are your enemies. Pray for those who persecute you. As the children of God, we recognize that He loved us when we were His enemies. And so we are called to love even our enemies. Instantly, we think, well, that is impossible. And I agree. From a human perspective, impossible to love those who hate you. It's impossible to pray for those who persecute, but it's always Him possible. And He gave His life for us so that He could live in us and live through us. And so when we feel like we cannot love someone, then we say, Lord, I'm going to allow you to love through me. And Lord, I want to experience your heart for even those who persecute me. Because that is what it means to be a son of the Father. That's the beauty of the good news, is that by entrusting ourselves to Him and receiving the gift of life, that we are born again by His Spirit and have His life in us. so that we are now the children of God. And that all that he calls us to is now him possible. He says, if you only love those who love you, how are you any different than the world? How are you any different than the Gentiles, the unbeliever? That's what they do. He says, you must be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. And that's the beauty of the good news. No, my behavior and my attitudes are not always perfect. But by his one perfect sacrifice, he has perfected me. He's made me whole and he's made me complete. And he has empowered me and you as his children to allow him to do all that he calls us to through us. We're the branches, he's the vine. And we're not struggling to produce fruit. We're bearing fruit. We're releasing his life through us. We're consenting to his divine presence in us and through us. So friends, don't look for people to be your enemies, but love all of them. And when it's impossible, remember it's always him possible. Because we who have been transformed and have given his life have a different attitude, a different way of living in this world as the sons, the children of God. I love you. I hope it encourages you. Have a great day.